Already in the classroom, Nayeon and Jong were curiously observing the couple who had previously been intimate. The atmosphere in the room was a bit tense with whispers and furtive glances. Both were silently wondering what would happen now that the couple was there. The protagonist, with a mix of surprise and curiosity, thought to himself, after all, they showed up to class. At the end of the day, they must care about studying. His thoughts reflected the incredulity of the moment, trying to make sense of the couple's actions. Nayeon, trying to process what she was seeing, responded that she hadn't expected anything like that. "I never imagined I'd see something like this," she said, shaking her head slightly, her voice filled with astonishment as if she still couldn't believe what was happening before her eyes. "What did you expect to see then?" asked the protagonist with a mix of curiosity and confusion, his question lingering in the air, echoing in Nayeon's mind. Blushing slightly, Nayeon admitted that she only thought they'd be kissing. "I didn't expect to see people doing that," she added, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush, a sign of her discomfort. She added that it seemed a bit strange to be doing that in the classroom. "I won't be able to get the image of the class president out of my head all day," she murmured almost to herself, as if trying to process the situation. Suddenly, a classmate shouted from the back of the room, "Don't talk so loud." The sudden intervention made the protagonist and Nayeon quickly shrink back, their hearts beating a little faster from the shock. Jong told Nayeon she shouldn't be so upset, and after all, that's how they came into the world, trying to ease her with a bit of humor. However, his words didn't seem to have the desired effect. All of a sudden, the protagonist felt a strange sensation running through his mind, as if a series of thoughts had suddenly invaded. He began imagining Yuna telling him she'd had trouble with her wedding and asking him to have a child with her. The scene unfolded vividly in his mind, making him question if he was truly ready for something like that. Blushing deeply, he apologized to Nayeon for oversharing, his voice trembling slightly, reflecting his embarrassment and regret for having let his thoughts slip. Nayeon, meanwhile, looked around carefully and noticed many other couples. This made her think about what it might mean for others to see her and Young together. Feeling a little self-conscious, she quickly began to blush, her cheeks turning a soft pink that betrayed her. Stammering slightly, she told Young that if they stayed together, everyone would think they were dating. It was a genuine concern she couldn't help but express. The protagonist quickly responded that she should stop thinking such nonsense and start taking notes so she wouldn't end up asking him for notes later. He was trying to steer the conversation toward something more practical and less embarrassing. The teacher, who was giving the lecture, noticed that the protagonist and his friend were chatting and called them out, her voice echoing through the classroom, making them both feel embarrassed as they quickly focused on the lesson. "Nayeon, come see me after class," the teacher exclaimed, her voice echoing across the room and drawing everyone's attention. Later, Nayeon was complaining to the teacher about being made to carry boxes, arguing that she was too hard on women, her voice a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Elag, who was also present, wondered silently how the boxes could feel heavy for her if she lifted weights every morning. The teacher sighed and, with a serious look, replied that their mothers would be proud, adding, "How can you be so arrogant?" Her words were firm, but there was a hint of resignation in her tone. This teacher, with a slender figure and beautiful face, was the friend of Aunt Yuna. Her name was Soyon, and her commanding presence always garnered respect from the students. The protagonist and his friend started arguing, their voices gradually rising. Soyon sighed lightly, watching them with a mixture of patience and weariness. Suddenly, Soyon's phone began to ring, surprising her, the ringtone breaking the tense atmosphere and diverting both of their attention. She answered the call, and to everyone's surprise, it was the manager. They began talking about work matters, and the protagonist watched her as she spoke while continuing to carry the box with visible effort, intrigued by the conversation and trying to distract himself from his task. In that moment, Nayeon placed her box on top of Young's as if it were a joke. Her gesture was playful, her eyes shining with mischief, trying to lighten the atmosphere with her game. "You're going to carry it? Thanks a lot, Oppa," Nayeon said with a mischievous smile. The protagonist, clearly annoyed by the situation, replied that she should stop being ridiculous, his voice reflecting his irritation. Meanwhile, Soyon continued talking on the phone and seemed to be receiving complaints from the manager. Her expression turned tense, and her voice took on a more serious tone as she lowered her gaze and sighed deeply, trying to calm herself and maintain her composure. It was evident that the conversation was affecting her. She turned and looked at the protagonist, who was struggling with the two boxes, and asked, "What happened to Nayeon? Where did she go?" Her voice reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. Soyon, seeing that the protagonist was having difficulties, approached to help him carry the boxes. She thought it was too heavy for him alone, her gesture showing a mix of understanding and support. "What was that long sigh about?" the protagonist asked, trying to understand the reason for Soyon's sigh. His words sought a connection, trying to discover what had disturbed her so deeply. Soyon apologized and with a soft, sad tone told him that she had been fired, her words carrying a clear weight, reflecting the surprise and disappointment she felt about the news. She added that as of next semester, she wouldn't be teaching, which surprised the protagonist. This revelation left him feeling puzzled and concerned about his teacher's future. Soyon sighed deeply and commented that it was truly a shame to have been dismissed, her eyes showing a trace of sadness, but also resigned acceptance. The protagonist, trying to show empathy, intervened and told her that it must be really hard, apologizing for not knowing how to cheer her up, his voice reflecting his sincere desire to help. Soyon smiled slightly and thanked him for wanting to console her, appreciating his gesture of kindness. With determination, Soyon dropped the boxes to the floor and exclaimed that she no longer cared about being fired, her voice taking on a tone of defiance, as if she were ready to face the situation with courage. "Hey, handsome student here, do you want to have a drink with me?" Soyon suddenly asked, a playful smile on her face. Her invitation broke the tense atmosphere, leaving the protagonist a little bewildered, but also intrigued by the unexpected proposal. Blushing slightly and with a mix of nervousness and curiosity, he replied that he was up for it. His mind was full of questions, and his heart pounded as he wondered what he was getting into. Soyon, visibly happy, exclaimed enthusiastically that she wouldn't take him back. Her energy and determination seemed to infect the protagonist, although he was still somewhat dazed by the situation. Later, they were both in a car, the atmosphere charged with tension and anticipation, with the vehicle parked in a secluded spot. The protagonist was lying back in the seat, completely flushed and unable to believe what was happening before his eyes. Everything felt surreal, as if he were living a strange dream. Above him was Soyon, undressing slowly, her movements deliberate and assured as she asked the protagonist to go through with it. The scene was intense and charged with emotion, leaving the protagonist speechless, completely absorbed in the moment. The liquor store owner bid the protagonist and his companion farewell, advising them to be careful, his tone laced with concern as he noted the state the teacher was in. Yang was holding his teacher, trying to keep her from falling to the ground. He held her firmly, struggling to support her as Soyon, completely drunk, couldn't stand on her own. Yang helped her walk, worried about her state and making sure she wouldn't get hurt. As he watched Soyon appear to fall asleep, Yang questioned what he should do in situations like that. He recalled that he was trying to cheer his teacher up. That was his main goal, although the circumstances had taken an unexpected turn. Upon learning that the protagonist couldn't drink, Soyon burst into laughter, her laughter contagious but also revealing her altered state. "Humans are like this. You'll have to manage your loneliness for the rest of your life," Soyon said amid laughter, her tone blending amusement with a hint of mockery. She added playfully that when he went on a date and got action, he'd forget things for a while. Her words were direct and filled with innuendo. The protagonist, completely blushing, asked if he should hear things like that. His voice trembled slightly, reflecting his discomfort and surprise at Soyon's remarks. A little annoyed, Soyon responded that he shouldn't be embarrassed and pointed out that he was a man who had never had a relationship. Pointing at him, she said he should go out a lot while he was still young, or he would regret it. Her words carried a mix of advice and reprimand, as if she were sharing a universal truth. The protagonist calmed down a little, watching her intently, and replied that he would take her advice. His voice was more serene, trying to show respect for Soyon's words. Professor Gu Soyon, not Aunt Soyon, was an important figure in his life, a direct connection to his mother and Aunt Yuna. Their relationship went beyond school formalities. His mother, Aunt Yuna, and Aunt Soyon had been friends since childhood. This deep, long-lasting friendship was something he had always heard about and admired. They often traveled together. Well, that's what they told him. Although he didn't remember all the details, he knew those experiences had been significant for them all. With a determined tone, Jong told his teacher she'd had enough to drink, trying to set a limit out of concern for her state. Before leaving, the protagonist and Soyon toasted with a glass of soju, marking a symbolic moment, a close for an intense and emotional night. Jong didn't like the taste. He found it totally bland, yet he decided not to complain, wanting to keep the peace and goodwill. He looked ahead, surprised to see his teacher asleep at the table. The scene was almost comical, but also concerned him about Soyon's state, and so we returned to the present, where the protagonist had helped Soyon into her car, finding himself in a delicate situation as he tried to handle everything with care. He was talking to someone, telling them there was a convenience store nearby and that they were in the car parking lot. His words were precise, looking for a solution to Soyon's state and ensuring everything stayed under control. He hung up the phone and questioned what he had asked for and if they would be okay. His thoughts were full of doubts and uncertainty, trying to ensure everything went well. Soyon woke up, still slightly drunk, noticing that Yang was outside the car. Her eyes barely opened, but she saw his figure in the darkness. "What are you doing standing there?" she asked in a sleepy voice. Yang replied that he was waiting for the replacement driver. His answer was brief and straightforward, trying to explain his presence outside the vehicle. Soyon told him not to wait outside and to get in the car with her. Her tone was insistent, not wanting to be alone at that moment. The protagonist, a little flushed, responded that it was okay and told her not to worry, trying to calm her. "Do you want to make me feel bad?" Soyon asked, annoyed, her voice reflecting a mix of frustration and vulnerability. Yang, having no choice, accepted the invitation and got into the car, feeling slightly uncomfortable but determined to stay with her. He sat down, and with a quick movement, Soyon lay on the protagonist's lap. Her actions were unexpected, and Yang didn't know how to react in that situation, his mind full of questions. "I'll borrow your knee to sleep for a while," Soyon said, whispering softly. Jong, though surprised, whispered that it was okay and that he would lend her his knee to rest a bit. While she slept, Soyon began to apologize in a low voice. Her words were confused and full of regret. "It seems funny to me that a woman who has lost her marriage is trying to give advice on how to live to someone else," she added in a broken voice. Her confessions showed deep sadness and self-criticism, revealing her vulnerability to Jong. "That's not the case, Professor," the protagonist exclaimed with a voice full of determination. He added that he thought she was a really amazing person, that she was kind, and that the students had a lot of respect for her. "I respect you a lot as a teacher, too," he continued, making Soyon blush a little, her cheeks turning a faint shade of red, surprised by the unexpected compliment. The protagonist, enthusiastic, exclaimed that none of her facets were pathetic, his eyes shining with sincerity as he tried to convince her to value herself more. Soyon was completely taken aback and blushing. Upon hearing those words from her student, she hadn't expected such a show of appreciation and support. "Be careful where you're touching," said Soyon, making the protagonist blush deeply. He quickly pulled his hand back and began apologizing for everything. His words rushed as he tried to make up for any discomfort caused. In his sudden movement, his head hit the roof of the car. The impact was unexpected and painful, pulling a groan of pain from him. He was completely sore, and Soyon noted he seemed very confused, her tone filled with concern as she observed his reaction carefully. "Is Yang still a baby?" asked Soyon, intrigued, her voice a blend of teasing and curiosity. The protagonist, still in pain, responded firmly that he wasn't, his words steady as he tried to maintain his dignity. Soyon could only look at him intently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of amusement and tenderness, as she couldn't help but smile at the situation, her cheeks lightly blushing. Then, Soyon asked Jong to touch her, as he had done a moment before. Those words left Yang stunned, unsure how to respond to the unexpected request. "Don't you want to?" asked Soyon, her tone mixing curiosity and challenge. When he didn't respond, she took Yang's hand and gently placed it on her chest, her heart beating quickly under his palm. The protagonist was completely overwhelmed as his hand rested there, touching something he'd never imagined he would. His thoughts were a whirlwind, trying to process what was happening. Without wasting any time, Yang started moving his hands, a little awkwardly at first, each movement sending an electric current through Soyon's body. She asked him to keep going, her voice between sighs, reflecting a mixture of pleasure and longing. After a heated moment, they both began to remove the clothes they were wearing, moving with a mix of urgency and shyness. Their clothes fell to the floor one by one, revealing the warm and trembling skin of both. They shared a passionate kiss, their lips meeting with an intensity that seemed to stop time. At one moment, Soyon paused, and with a playful smile, told him to wait a moment so she could take off her glasses. They continued what they were doing, the closeness of their bodies heightening the tension and desire in the air. In the midst of the fervor, Soyon paused and asked, "Was that your first kiss? I've shared so many of your first experiences today." Her tone was a mix of curiosity and pride, aware that she'd shared unique moments with him. After that intimate moment, Soyon, with a tone full of tenderness, looked at Jason and asked if she could have him, hinting that she appreciated his understanding and patience. Her eyes reflected a blend of affection and need, and the atmosphere was charged with palpable intimacy. Yang, still a bit dazed from the intensity of the moment, took a second to process what had been asked. Finally, without a second thought and with unexpected firmness, he responded with a simple yes. His voice was soft yet determined, revealing his willingness to continue with what they were both experiencing together.